Hello and welcome to this video. What is a Python list? A Python list is a collection of data that can be of mixed data types. Unlike variables that can only store one value in a container, a Python list can store multiple values inside one container. Each item in a list is separated by a comma, and you can create a list by using square brackets. For example, you can create a list called fruits and you assign the values or the items for that list inside square brackets, and you separate each item by a comma. You can access individual items in a list by their index position. So the first item is always index 0, the second item in the list is index 1, and so on. Also, you can change the order in which an item is positioned in a list by changing their index position. Let's create a new notebook. So I'll come here, do new, Python 3, and I'm going to double click and give it a name. I'm going to call it Python list, and I'll click rename. So you can see here we have a new notebook called Python list. So let's go ahead and create some list. In this cell, I've created a new list called animals, and I've assigned some values or elements to the list. If I want to access any item or element from the list, I will have to do that using their index number. So the first item on the list will always have an index of 0, the second will have an index of 1, and so on. To access an individual item from a list, you do that using the index position. So you can see here in this cell, I'm using the print statement to print out the index of the item 1. So that is going to be dog because the first item is going to be 0. So if I run this cell, you can see here it's printed out dog as the first index. Okay, the first index is 0, but the item with the index of 1 is dog. You can also have negative indexing. Negative indexing means you can access an item from the end of the list using a negative. So if you're doing a -1, that means you're accessing the very last item in a list. If you're doing a -2, you're accessing the second last item on the list. You can see here accessing -2, which means I expect it to return penguin. So if I run this now, you can see it has returned penguin. I'm creating another list here in this cell called fruits, and it's got 3 items in this list. So I'm just going to run the cell to create it. To access an item from the list, you just reference the index. For example, here I want to access the fruit called cherry. I just call the name of the list and pass in the index. If I click run, you can see here it has returned cherry. If you don't want the quotes enclosed, just do a print statement and wrap it around the print statement like I did here in this cell number 2. That will return the item without quotes. Another thing you can do, you can change the value of an item in a list. For example, the list called fruits, I want to replace the value of apple with orange. All I need to do is reference the name of the list, pass in the index of what I want to change, which is 0. 0 is apple, and then assign a new value, which is orange. So if I run that, that will change that. So if I now call the name of the list, I should no longer have apple listed. You can see the position of apple has been replaced by orange. You can also add items to a list by using the append method. So in this cell here, I'm going to add apple to this list. So you do that using the append method. So you call the name of the list, which is fruits, dot append, and inside the parentheses for that method, you pass in the name of the item you want to insert. And normally that will add that at the end of the list. So if I run that, it will add that to the list. So if I now call the name of the list, we should have apple listed at the end here. I'm creating another list here with mixed data type. So you can create a list that has a mixture of data types, and you can also have a list include under other list. So in this list here called mixed underscore data, inside the items, I've got a string, I've got an integer, I've got a float, I've got a boolean, and I've got a list. See this list I created here called fruits. I'm adding that to this new list. So let me run that, and that creates it. So if I want to access an item, for example, if I want to access the integer from that list, so I reference the name of the list, which is mixed data, and I pass in the name, the value or the index of that integer is 1, which is 47. So if I run that now, that gives me the value. You can also remove items from a list. Now there are a few ways you can do that. You can use the pop function. So you call the name of the list, in this case fruits.pop, and inside the parentheses you pass in the index of the item you want to remove from the list. So in this fruits here, index number 3 is going to be apple. If you don't supply the index, it will automatically remove the last item from the list. This is the second way. You can use the remove method. I've commented that both because I only want the first method to run. So you can do a fruits.remove and pass in the value of the item you want to remove. You can also use the delete key. You do del fruits, and then you pass in the index of the item, and that will also remove it from the list. But in this example, I'm only going to use the pop method. So I'm going to run this cell, and you can see here it tells me it has removed apple from that list. So if I type in fruits and run the cell, you can see apple is no longer listed. Another thing you can do is loop through a list, and you can do that using a for loop. So in this example here, I'm saying for x is going to represent each item in the list. So I say for x in the list called animals, I want it to print x. So it will print all the items. So if I click run, you can see here it's printed out all the items in the list. Another thing you can do is check the length of a list. So if you want to find out how many items there are in the list, this is the function. There's a function called len. So because I want to print it out, I'm wrapping it inside this print function, and inside the len function you pass in the name of the list. So if I run this now, it gives me 8. It tells me that that list called animals has 8 items in it. Another thing you can do is clear or empty a list. To do that, there is a special function called clear. So this is a list I want to empty called fruits. So you do fruits.clear, you add the parentheses, you run that, and that should clear the list. So if I type in fruits now, it should return an empty list. You can see it's returned an empty list. So that is it for this video. In this video, we learned about a Python list. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.